Listen up.
Hey there, everybody. This is Cody Pondsmith, General Manager at Talsorian Games and the lead designer on the Witcher team.
And this is Mike Pondsmith, lead writer on our Talsorian Cyberpunk line and the guy who killed your Cyberpunk character.
And we're here to do our show, Listen Up, where we take fan questions from all around the internet and try to answer them as succinctly as possible.
That's you, so make sure you got some good questions.
So let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about some of the inner workings of Talsorian. We're going to take you behind the scenes.
Whoa, could be trouble.
Probably will be trouble. So let's start off. J.S. Kennedy asks, "Hey, Mike and Cody, how are you? Doing well, I hope."
I'm doing well.
Pretty good. The Witcher books tell us about the character that Cody made in it, but what character did Mike run in Cyberpunk 2020?
Well, that's actually a difficult question. Most people assume that I run Johnny Silverhand or Morgan Blackhand, and those are characters that are typically known to be my characters, but they're really not. Actually, the character that I typically play in Cyberpunk games is a guy named Ripperjack who shows up every so often in the various bits of Cyberpunk 2020 as a sidebar character.
He's kind of sprinkled everywhere throughout 2020.
Yeah, the thing about Ripperjack is, unlike our main hero characters, as we like to call them, Ripperjack is the punk on the street. He's sort of a semi-competent cross of the solo and a nomad, although he was originally designed as a nomad. And for him, things never quite go right. He's the guy who somehow sets off the mine or triggers the kill bots or whatever. So I really like Ripperjack because he is so utterly normal. And people who may have seen me wandering around conventions wearing my black and red cyberpunk ball jacket may have noticed that the tag on that actually is for Ripperjack because that's the guy I play.
Well, here's an interesting. We always hear little bits of his voice, as it were. What is Ripperjack like? Like, I won't maybe not go as far as his deep and complex background, but
Oh yeah, well, Ripperjack is basically a nomad who wandered into the city, got his bike stolen the first day he was there, has been trying to save up all his money ever since to get back to his nomad pack. So he keeps taking a variety of jobs that never quite work out. He's short, he's squat, he's kind of hairy. He actually resembles our old art director quite a bit, who was a kind of short, hairy Hispanic dude with thick glasses. Ripperjack doesn't have glasses, he has mirror shades instead. And he has kind of a gravelly voice. I like to describe him as being kind of like a cross between a cyberpunk typical character and a dwarf.
Dangerous territory there.
Yeah, on that edge.
Okay.
Well, let me try one here.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Jason Rand.
Jason Rand.
Yes, he wants to ask.
Hate that guy.
Not again. Okay. Jason, you asked what was the grossest potion you drank while researching the Witcher tabletop RPG. And let me tell you, Jason, he researched some really gross ones.
I think the best part about that whole sort of excursion was, I think people, I'm not sure, but I think people get the feeling I just kind of threw this stuff together. It was actually weirdly more analytical. I remember, Mike remembers me kind of doing a bunch of hours of research on where you could find the most DNA material in creature to figure out what the mutagen was, and eventually wandering through the meat department of an Asian market looking for pork liver.
Yeah, I was busy telling people I didn't know him.
But so you got to imagine I get back and I was just generally making, the sort of the process of a mutagen. So I get back and I'm putting together, I'm chopping up this pork liver and then dumping it in this little, I actually went out and bought a little saucepan that you might have over a campfire.
Because I was never going to let him use any of our saucepans.
They did have some scum afterwards, but
scum?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what that was. Scum does not quite describe it.
So you pour all of this really finely minced up pork liver into a pan, with a bunch of herbs, which I chose like sage and some other herbs that have been used in alchemy before.
And at first, it starts off smelling really pretty good, actually.
No, the horrible part is you put in pork liver and you put in some like sage, and then you just dump vodka all over it because we roughly figure that that dwarven spirits is probably vodka. So you've got this combination of pork liver, herbs, and vodka, and it doesn't exactly smell terrible as you're simmering it down.
It smells kind of like a pork stew with a lot of alcohol over it.
It didn't exactly help that the vodka I got for the process, I didn't want to buy really nice, expensive vodka.
This is not Stoli, let me tell you.
It came in a mouthwash bottle. It was in a legitimate plastic mouthwash bottle. It was like $6. So I boil all this down, and unfortunately, I don't have the tools to really put it through a still or anything. So I pour it out and kind of strain it, and it's in this little bottle, and it just looks after a couple seconds like the bottom of a murky river. There's just this layer of like muck at the bottom.
I saw stuff swimming in it.
I wouldn't be surprised. Weird part was it actually tasted kind of like pork soup, which you think wouldn't be bad until you imagine Geralt sitting down and preparing to fight a monster and pulling out a little vial of cold pork soup that's all like congealed at the top and knocking that back.
I'm gonna shake this up first, okay? Yeah.
It was not
pour it on a monster, man.
One of those rare situations where the taste wasn't exactly unpleasant, but everything else about it was just terrible. So I hope that answers your question, Jason.
And we hope you're not going to try to make this at home.
As long as you use the right non-poisonous herbs, it'll work. I'd love to someday actually put it through a still.
Yeah, well, I'm going to make sure that we clarify that we are not responsible for you drinking this.
Yeah. We will not be responsible for your death or your mutation.
Yes.
So, Mike. Connor asks, Mike, of all the official cyberpunk material you've worked on, what adventure was the most fun to write or playtest?
Okay. Weirdly enough, the one that is the most fun is one that I use a lot. I call it The Apartment. And for those of you who may have followed some of our misadventures on IGN, I ran The Apartment for the IGN team online. You can spot it over at IGN or the links at our Talsorian webpage.
I'm sure Jay will put in some links.
I'm pretty sure. So here's the thing. The Apartment is one of those which is very deceptively simple. And I recommend it to anybody who really wants to get a good start. The players are all living in Night City, and they have a shared apartment building. One of the characters owns it, and the rest of them all have rent-controlled, low-cost, really nice apartments in this building. And the trick is you let your players build on it, furnish things. I like to occasionally throw an IKEA catalog out and see what they do with it, but they get invested in it. And it's well known. They know what it's like. They have their thing going on. They got their businesses, your fixers having people over, your drug dealers doing the drug deals. It's all working. Soirees. And then all of a sudden, somebody decides to put up a microwave tower on top of the apartment, which is located on top of one of the higher spots in Night City, and is in a perfect place to put up a microwave array. So their building has been condemned and is going to be knocked down. Well, cyberpunks, they're not going to let this go. So the fun is watching the players all gathering together to stop. Oh, by the way, the noise you hear in the background is our next door neighbors who occasionally pound on things. So sorry about that. Boy, this makes our neighborhood sound pretty strange.
That's really vague. Just like what?
No one died, and that's not screaming. Okay, so basically, they start to get rid of the first people who serve the papers and say you're evicted, and usually they throw them out. And then more powerful groups show up. The cops show up, and then they run them out. And then eventually they start sending guys from Arasaka out to run them out. And it just starts building and building. Well, the great part was in this scenario, it's deceptively simple because everybody brings to the party whatever they had in their life path. So, for example, in the version we did with IGN, the apartment owner had a background where his family had been run out, and this was the last stand they'd ever had. It was handed down to him by his grandma or somebody like that, and he was, by God, not giving it up. But one of the people in the apartment also happened to have a totally gormless kid's sister, and the younger gormless kid's sister was in love with a booster ganger. No, correction, a poser ganger. She was in love with a Mr. Howell out of the Gilligans. Okay, so for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, might need an explanation.
Okay, the Gilligans, poser gangs. Poser gangs are essentially rabid cosplay gangs in 2020. So imagine Juggalos turn up to 20. And they focus on a particular aspect. For example, we have the Kennedys, we have the Gilligans. The Gilligans are essentially people who all have biosculpted themselves or take on the aspects of characters out of an old flat screen bit called Gilligan's Island, which means you have the professor, Marianne, the millionaire, and his wife. So it doesn't matter how crazy they are. It doesn't matter that the professor is carrying a howitzer that could level half a city block. They're still in character. And that howitzer is covered in bamboo just because.
You know, someday we should really do a gang psychology book. Just like deep dive into it. On why people.
I can use my psychology degree. Okay. So at any rate, she had a sister who was dating a Gilligan. And through a whole bunch of coordinated craziness, we ended up with this mass mob of various booster gangs and local poser gangs, all defending this building as Arasaka attempted to storm it, until they realized that somebody had gotten in earlier and put a really large bomb in the building to blow it up. And so the outcome was they now had several thousand people protesting in the streets, guarding their building, and they were all going to be killed when the bomb went up. And at the last moment, as you'll see if you actually drop into the IGN run, spoilers, they do find a way out of it. The wonderful part about the apartment is that anyone can run it, and in large part, your players create all the action. And it also follows one of the basic precepts, I believe, in Cyberpunk, which is that it's never about saving the world, it's about saving yourself. It's personal. And believe me, nothing's more personal than when you finally gotten your collection of very rare something or other on all the shelves in your apartment, and everything's all clean, and you're going to settle down for a nice, comfortable meal that came out of some can somewhere, and suddenly someone knocks on the door and says, you're moving in 12 hours.
Well, I remember the Cyberpunk game you ran me and Lisa and a few other people in, where I was a fixer who mainly did false IDs and drugs. I was starting to really branch out into drugs. And I remember you let me have.
You know, that's really worrisome to hear your son say I'm starting to branch out into drugs.
I probably made the most money in that whole party, save for the corporate.
It's true.
But you let me have like my family house up in Haywood that was like the little like white picket fence.
Oh yes.
And I loved that house. Like I like the entire lower floor was a drug den, like a straight up meth lab. But everything above ground was like this nice white picket fence that my family had left me when they were in prison.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that this is all imaginary. Okay, so DEA people do not raid my house.
And then like halfway through the game, you blew it up, and I remember my character standing in the rubble of my blown up house, like picking through the rubble, and that's when I started creating biological weapons and loading them like Scarecrow into a goddamn grenade launcher.
Yep. So, the important thing to remember, one of my favorites is also one of my simplest, the apartment. Feel free to use it, because believe me, if you meet me at a con, I will probably use it on you.
The legend lives on.
Yes, I hope so. Okay, so let's try another one. Genius Robinson. I wonder if he's really a genius, you think? Okay.
I don't know, might be.
Genius, we'd like to see your scores, man. Okay.
Please send those in.
Yes. How do guys at Talsorian Games create game balance when it comes to making the rules for a tabletop RPG? Okay, well, there's a lot of things that go into this. We are really, really picky about realism. So the first thing we generally do is we try to model things off real stuff. So, for example, when people complain to me about things like armor and how it works, we have the armor. We wear it. We get armor specifications from the FBI and the armor manufacturers. But yesterday, I was out with Lisa, and we were actually looking at an armored backpack and figuring how we were going to put that into the Chromebooks next.
We need to get an armored briefcase at some point.
Oh, we have an armored briefcase.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We also have the full body armor. And we have some of the, okay. And anyway, the helmet. I just got the helmet in.
I spent a ridiculous amount of time figuring out and studying exactly how far and how effectively you could throw throwing knives and throwing axes.
Yeah, and we have more swords and knives and guns than I possibly want to imagine. Not because we're really crazy that way, but because we really do need to know how this works. So that is usually the baseline. So from there, using sometimes combinations, for example, in Cyberpunk, of FBI statistics, loading charts and tables for various, handgun and rifle rounds, field stuff where we actually go out and shoot the darn stuff and look at, how it affects things. We build a model, and then the model is usually taken to a baseline couple of weapons. And we work on the effect between the weapon versus the protection or armor, the ranges, the situations that you're going to encounter. For example, very few people are going to be in the middle of a gunfight fighting like they would on a range where they have plenty of time, they can aim their shot and all that. It's, oh my God, somebody's shooting at me. I'm hiding behind this trash can, and I don't think it's going to stop that bullet. That's more realistic. So once we get a basic set of models together, we begin to do the math. Cody does it by hand. He's crazy.
I've gotten into it a bit. I've got some Excel sheets under my belt.
I build massive Excel sheets where I run 10 to 20,000 different combats at a given time, so I can get an actual model for what's going to happen. And then we start tweaking those so we get the effect. In the final analysis, what we want is reality. We also want to make it fun. So we change a few things here and there. We alter a few things in a minor way. So, for example, armor doesn't stop you quite as much as it would be if you had to wear a 35-pound vest, because that sucker's heavy, let me tell you. In fact, it sits in a corner of the office right now. Nobody ever wants to move the case it's in. So basically, we do tinker with it a little bit, but we try to keep things fairly realistic because both our fans appreciate it and we know that we're on pretty solid ground. So it's a combination of models, it's a combination of reality, it's a combination of a lot of just math studies and Excel sheets. And because we tend to work that way, we don't use as many of the formulas that other people use for calculating out game balances and so forth like that.
It could be kind of interesting because actually, between the Witcher line and the Cyberpunk line, we have a bit of sort of form difference almost. A lot of what I did to balance Witcher came down to really more emulation of the feel of Witcher. I spent, before I really started digging into numbers, I spent a lot of time kind of watching people play the Witcher video games, playing the Witcher video games myself, reading through the books and analyzing how things happen in the books to try and feel out how the Witcher world should feel and how things happen in the Witcher world. How does a combat flow in Witcher? How do people interact with each other in Witcher? And how does that affect how players should interact with the world around them? And, what I found was that you basically, for Witcher, I sat down and took, pages and pages of notes about how everything interacted, how magic functioned and whatnot, and then just started applying numbers to it as they kind of fit into that, sort of observation of the world that I was kind of emulating.
Yeah, he has a different situation than I have, because Witcher needs to simulate what you see in a video game. That's essentially what the license is about, and the books. So you really need to get the right feel even above the reality. In our case, it's kind of amusing because I'm seeing it in the other direction with CDPR adapting Cyberpunk into Cyberpunk 2077, where they're now taking the weapons that we built and scaling them and figuring out how they exactly look or feel or do the right things in a video game. And luckily, I've worked in video games, so along the way, many of the things are fairly easily convertible.
I think the last step, as you were passing down to me so many years ago, the last step of any amount of game balancing is iteration. At the end of the day, you have to test it, and you have to fix anything you find, and you have to test it again, and then you have to fix anything you find then, and you have to test it again. You have to do that for 9 or 10 rounds before you start kind of nudging things into place in the right feel and the right kind of function.
Yeah, my final advice to young game designers starting out who want to do tabletop RPGs or any type of game is do not be afraid to test. Testing is your friend. And the first time you get a really savage play test on something, you're going to go take your little head in your hands and go, oh, I'm in pain. But after that, you'll get better and you'll continue to get better.
You won't want to do it.
But you should do it.
Find somebody who, if you can find somebody who just brutally abuses systems,
like his
them,
wife, for
example. Like my wife, for example. Find them and have them test your system. You'll find every problem you could possibly find.
and that's when you know, when they run out of ways to exploit your system, that you're probably on about the right level of balance.
But we're not going to lie. It's going to hurt.
Yes, a lot. And on that note, I think we should roll off into the night.
Indeed. So this has been Listen Up. I'm Cody Pondsmith.
I'm Mike Pondsmith.
And as per usual, we'd like to ask all of you who had a good time listening to our melodic voices here to consider liking and subscribing to our Talsorian Games. Keep in touch, and we will be back with another series of fan questions. And thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for showing up, and we'll see you pretty soon.
This has been Listen Up. Your hosts were Mike and Cody Pondsmith. Production work was done by Tara Jones and Jay Gray. This video and the games and characters mentioned in it are copyright our Talsorian Games. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep your sword sharp and stay safe on the streets.
Shut up and help me loot the body, Ripper.